And I think what is quite fascinating is a lot of female winemakers have been through a similar journey. It's been an adventure. These are people who love what they do, and they're making great products that are commercially viable. There should be an equal amount of comfort in selecting wines from great female winemakers into a restaurant list or a store, and I think they will sell equally well because they have such rich, compelling stories.
Hey guys, this is Sid Patel, CEO of London Wine Competition and Beverage Trade Network. We are the 8th annual London Wine Competition. I'm live here from London. I'm here with Ruchira. She's our judge and one of the famous sommeliers out here in UK, especially known for her recent work in growing in a wine list, by 3x in this Indian restaurant, which we will talk about. But more importantly, this is about developing a wine list with purpose, and especially, advocating women out there in the industry, right? Putting them out, putting their wines out. So thank you for joining me here.
It is my absolute pleasure.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely. So let's start right there on sort of, developing a wine list with purpose.
Mm-hmm.
What comes to your mind sort of, when you want to develop those kind of missions?
I think what is really important when considering creating a wine list is to always sort of go back to why it needs to be done. So you've got two things that are happening. One is knowing your audience. There is no guesswork there. It's both the kind of customers that are coming into your establishment, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's, the kind of stores. And you also need to think about the people you would like to attract. So I think that's a very important starting point. And then after that, sort of thinking about how can we be bold, how can we add value, and, to really think about wines that are fun, that have great stories, that there is a lot of depth. And then to sort of think about, if especially, from an industry standpoint, is like, how can we move this industry forward? So that to me is that sweet intersection of, balancing commercialism with the need to actually progress the industry as a whole and to educate consumers into wanting and expecting better. So to me, I think when I think about purpose, it actually starts there rather than, hey,
So that is a business purpose, right?
Yes, but I think the business purpose also, I think, aligns with the consumer preference and the storytelling purpose, so to speak.
True.
Because you ultimately want people to enjoy what they're drinking.
Yeah.
In the context of where they're drinking it along with the food.
Yep. You've been advocating female winemakers as well, right? So we'll stick to the topic of wine list still, on how sommeliers can include those kind of wines which are made in or founded by women winemakers. But I want to go practical as well, right? At the same time, as we discussed, it has to drive profits.
Yeah.
So how did you do it, or what are your suggestions there?
I think that for me, I'm an Indian-born woman. I grew up in a conservative family that didn't drink. And to actually be in the place that I am, I think, it was a bold step. And I think what is quite fascinating is a lot of female winemakers have been through a similar journey. It's been an adventure. These are people who love what they do, and they're making great products that are commercially viable. So the question I would actually ask is, why should we not think about them when we are including them on lists, There should be an equal amount of comfort in selecting wines from great female winemakers into a restaurant list or, a store. And I think they will sell equally well because they have such rich, compelling stories. And these women who make these wines, and making wine, especially if you're a winemaker, it is not a walk in the park. It is a real, genuine labor of love. And the products that then come out is born out of true passion, and you taste it in the liquid that you sip. So again, I would go back to why should they not be on the lists?
So I want to, play devil's advocate here. Yeah. I personally don't think that when we taste a wine, or the industry is that way, asking now what is the color of that winemaker or what is the sex of that winemaker. I don't think we have that question itself anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there is any selection happening there. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a little bit historical. So I agree with the point that we want to get to a point of parity where you no longer need to ask, are there enough female winemakers represented in this versus not. I think the reality is ultimately it does come down to the liquid, what is right for a place. But when it comes to, and if we're really specifically talking about gender bias here, the reality is that we are not at parity. There is a significant proportion of female winemakers in the world, and they are not represented in the same way as you would sort of, see them on lists. So I think it probably is a task from an industry standpoint to create that voice and that space for them. So it's a little bit of work that needs to be done to get to a perfect point where we don't need to ask that question. And that I will say that it's also my experience when you look at it from a corporate world. I would never hire a person into a role that I don't think is fit for the role. But at the same time, I don't want a homogenous team, because I would want a team around me that has diversity of thought. And I think that's what you sort of see reflected in the products that you sort of end up drinking, in the wines that you end up drinking. So I agree, we need to get to a point of parity, but we're not there yet.
Let's say on the commerce of the wine list, right? I think you are a businesswoman, you understand that ultimately the wine list has to work.
Yeah.
And that's the actual pay job of a sommelier or a wine director.
Yes.
What is a great commercial wine list, and what are some nitty-gritty you can suggest to include to drive profits?
I think the starting point of a great wine list is looking at a confluence of, is the style right, is the region right, the quality, the price points, all of these pieces that then need to fit in with the kind of audience or the customers that are coming into your restaurant, or the kind of customers that you want to attract. So for example, if you're a restaurant that is, smart casual dining, but you want to kind of invite a more sort of, wine-loving, wine-appreciating crowd. So you kind of need to think about, right, I just cannot have very simple standard wines. I need to have something a little bit more fun. So you also need to be a little bit ambitious in that. But, the commercial elements, the basics will remain the same. I think the added value, the really big difference a person can make then is in the selection and the stories, the vibrancy, the curiosity that you can then build into your list, so that the people, your sommeliers who are selling the wine, are equally excited, and then they can kind of, bring the customer into that journey.
So on the performance of a wine brand on a list, how do you decide which to keep, which to not keep, beyond the obvious, which is what's selling and what's not selling? Let's say, maybe some are seasonal, some are customer asking, so it has obviously more demand, obviously, because they are the brands and they're the iconic producers. But then the rest, if the sommelier is just not pushing, is it fair to judge the brand never saw a sunlight? Or how do you make a decision that this just did not work?
That is a very good question, because I think if you've got sommeliers and then if they're not personally excited about a particular product, and then if you have chosen to list it, but then I think some of it is the job then of the wine director to make sure that, why is it that the sommeliers are not bought into the same reasoning that you have when you wanted to put it onto a list. So it could be a case of education and training and making them really understand it. But I think, on the equal piece, it is also listening to the people who are working on the floor and understanding, what it is, why is it that they are not either able to sell it or want to sell it. And if it's not working, then it's not working. Okay. And then, you find something else that will. So I think it could be a piece that can be corrected, or it could just be a case of, it is not going to work, and then let's try something different. And that's the beauty, having seasonality in your wine list, so you can actually put more things in, create a fresh perspective. So yes, even if you want to have consistency that customers want. So for example, people love a great Sauvignon Blanc, or they love a great Chardonnay. But there are many other wine styles and varieties that can have a similar delivery to the style. So, yes, let's have something that will hit the same excitement of a Sauvignon Blanc, for example, or, people's need for, say, a Chardonnay. And then you kind of start working with the South African Chenin Blanc, which has the acidity, it has the complexity, it has the oak. And that kind of can also make a difference.
Okay, I want to ask one question on the second glass. Okay, if I was, I'm seeing this in a different way. So those are things that we can control, but these are literally customer and wine. It's out there now. Yeah. The second glass thing is completely now how drinkable the wine is, and if it's right. So that can be the ultimate metric, despite some 5 cases or 2 cases, but if this wine always had the highest second glass ratio, that is your sort of a home run
that
product,
is a home
right?
run. That is a home run product.
Is there a metric, or do people pay attention to that sort of data?
I think they should, because I think it's one of those ones where I'm a big advocate for wines by the glass. I'm really, really big believer in it. And I think it doesn't matter what size of a restaurant you're in. You should have you should have done the homework to know that you can have confidence in your, at minimum, 3 to 4 wines that you can list by the glass. And to me, that piece that you're talking about, the second glass, I'm like, ideally the metric is after first glass, the customer's like, I think we won the bottle.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think it is a strong metric. Ultimately, you can total it up and you can sort of see how many glasses you've sold, but it's the ones where the customer literally kind of wants, oh, I should have bought the bottle.
Yeah.
Or after the first glass, they're like, we'll have a bottle.
Yeah, yeah. What is your experience been for London Wine Competition, and what do you think about the judging criteria, the judges? What's your take?
I have loved the cross-selection and the thoughtfulness in selecting experts from across the industry, whether you're talking about journalists, whether you're talking about wine buyers, sommeliers. I think there is a great representation of the industry in a room for the London Wine Competition. The piece that I have really enjoyed, and particularly on my table, is, we're all experts in our own fields, or at least we like to think so. And you evaluate the wines on quality, on value, and then I think my personal favorite is also on packaging, because you need to think of it as a holistic product. But then what is great is we have the opportunity to also calibrate and discuss with our fellow judges on where we are thinking we are sitting, because there is always an interesting point that you may not have thought of, coming from somebody else from a very different perspective in the industry, which I think is really healthy. And I have genuinely loved that. But I think, Sid, for me, my personal favorite is after we've evaluated the wines and when we get to do the packaging, I think is important, because it's the whole package that matters. Is when you're picking up a bottle from the shelf that cost £8, how does it look? It's the sight, and then you're looking at the quality. It is the whole. So I really like the way the criteria is done, because oftentimes I think packaging is judged very separately. And I like the way that it's sort of done here, but it's done with the authenticity and the honesty that you're doing the quality and you're doing the value before you come to the packaging. So you're not judging the wine by the label, so to speak.